I've noticed with a bunch of these pre-New Wave French films that they're very accessible to an American sensibility, at least of that time, I think. Like Grand Illusion is totally entertaining. There's all this awesome dialogue that is very appealing to an American. And this film is not the same sort of film, but it's still this very like classical style. The narrative is straightforward. It's not this like overtly experimental work or anything like that. It's just like a really top notch narrative filmmaking. And I think that we've watched a number of challenging films on this list, but people should know that this is actually quite accessible. You could totally watch it with your family.
Well, and it's really a masterclass in cinematic storytelling on a number of levels. One of the things that's really striking to me about the film from a cinematic perspective is how little dialogue there is in the opening act. When Saint Vincent goes to Châtillon-les-Dombes, where the film doesn't get into this history, but we see a little bit later that he has been a chaplain to a very wealthy and prestigious family, and he seems to have wanted to get away from that, to be closer to people who are poor and needy. And this is really kind of the tension in the film. We see Vincent. Vincent is seen in the film as a man who is constantly being torn between the attention and admiration of the wealthy and the prestigious and the illustrious, who the film often depicts as being rather frivolous and self-absorbed and vain and so forth. And then what he feels is his real calling to the poor, who are not necessarily any morally better than the rich. He describes them as being ugly and demanding and vulgar and touchy, but they have a moral claim on him. So he arrives at this village, at this town, Châtillon, which is in the grip of the Black Plague, and he wanders through the streets, and the streets are deserted, and the only sound we hear is this unnerving clatter of stones that people are throwing from the window in order to try to drive him away because they don't want anyone spreading the disease. And so much of the opening act proceeds in silence, and it's really a wonderful example of cinema as a visual art. Fundamentally, cinema is first and foremost a visual art, and then secondly an oral art, and then you can bring in dialogue and music and so forth. This isn't a film, I think, with any. I don't think there's any non-diegetic sound. I don't think there's a soundtrack at all. We do hear music, but I think it's always in frame, always in the story. But the visuals are first and foremost. And Renoir's cinematography is really very, very classical, moving very fluidly between objective and subjective points of view. It draws you into the story and into the drama and into what this priest is doing in this village that clearly doesn't want him.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm glad you brought all of that up, because I thought that was very striking too, how the film accomplishes so much in such a short span of time, not just in terms of exposition and introducing us to this character, but also drawing us in as viewers. There's so many exciting moments with the camera. I'm thinking, for instance, when he first arrives at the church, that's kind of decrepit and fallen apart. And it's like you said, we're switching between objective and subjective points of view as we move through this dilapidated chapel, and Monsieur Vincent is mounting the altar. It's kind of like this liturgical procession up onto the altar, and then he's throwing things down. You mentioned that there's a lot of use of silence and visual communication. This is just as true of the cinematography of the film as it is of the performance here. Pierre Fresnay, that's his name, the actor. Yeah. Yes. He has an amazing capacity for stillness and expression through the eyes, which I think is such a hallmark of excellent on-screen performance. But it's also something that lives in his body as well. We see that when he's clearing the altar, it evokes the Jesus driving the money changers out with the cord, but also in moments of quieter moments. For instance, when he's alone in his room with the woman who's been sent up, ostensibly to seduce him. There's like a whole scene that plays out between the two of them in silence, with glances, with expressions and in the eyes. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, that opening scene struck me too. Stephen, at the top of your review of this film, which I read after my first viewing, you described him as single-minded, and that was exactly the word that came to mind myself when watching the film. And we really get a sense of that in the opening scenes, just in the way that he responds to the rocks being thrown at him, that he's not freaking out, when he goes into this church, you immediately get like a wide shot of the decay of this building, the lapsed state of things. And he's walking by, and I think there's a chicken, and he
there's a chicken in a holy water stoop.
Yeah.
Or it's a baptismal font.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And he doesn't get mad at the chicken. He doesn't push it off. He kind of like
he picks it up and he puts it on the ground.
Yeah. But then when he gets to the altar, and there's some kind of casks, I don't know if they're supposed to be casks of wine or what, he like really, that's the first time you see him get emotional. And like, I mean, obviously there's plenty of emotions, but I mean like sort of exercised, and he sweeps them off, kind of with this violent force. And so we get all these different modes of expression from him just when he's going through the streets and going into this church, which is really telling.
It's the same when he goes into the supposed plague victim's home and he's tearing the boards off and breaking down the door. And then the tenderness later when he picks up her daughter and leaves, right? That sequence, the visual storytelling is really precise because we don't even see the daughter initially. He enters in and he has this moment with the now dead plague victim, who turns out not to have been a plague victim after all, before we see in the corner of the frame her daughter coming out of the shadows. It's almost, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, we see his response before we actually see her in the frame. So it is this really kind of excellent, very specific visual storytelling that's going on.